I was born in Wichita Falls, Texas. It was a great way to grow up, for sure. The adults are like, kids go outside, and so we just played in the barn where there's like big tractors and stuff. It was really fun. And my parents were married for about 3 years, and they got divorced. So my mom was pretty much a single mom, and she moved us around a lot.
As a boy, Brian Cargill's life is in constant motion.
I ended up going to probably 6 different elementary schools, probably 5 or 6 different junior highs, and 3 different high schools. It was pretty unstable most of the time.
Brian vows to build a secure future for himself. And when he graduates high school, he sets his sights on architecture.
I've always been very interested in buildings and structures and things like that. It just came so naturally to me. So by the time I got to graduation time, I already knew that I was going to go to architecture school.
By 1993, Brian is a 28-year-old architect living in Dallas. He's happily married, or so he thinks.
After a couple of years, my wife decided that she didn't want to be married anymore. And so I was just kind of left reeling. It was a big shock for me. At that point, my dreams had pretty much crumbled, and I was in an extremely vulnerable state. I just didn't know what to do with myself. I was just so distraught over this loss of kind of this idea of the nuclear family. That just seems like all I could think about.
9 months after the divorce is finalized, one of Brian's friends sets him up on a blind date.
He described her as very beautiful and very vivacious and intelligent, and he thought that we would be a good match.
Kimberly West is a 27-year-old receptionist.
We met, and I was very, very pleasantly surprised. She was really beautiful and just a very charismatic personality. She had just gotten divorced. She was in a custody situation with her ex. And so we kind of had some things in common. You know, we really hit it off.
Over the next several weeks, Brian and Kimberly start talking on the phone every day.
I felt like, oh, she really gets me. That she heard me, that she identified with me in a way that certainly my ex-wife had not done at all. It felt very romantic and just exciting. So it was great. Our second date was at a divorce support group at a church. And I got there a little early, and she was running late. Instead of waiting outside, I decided to just go ahead and go in. And so I sat down, and I kind of saved her a chair next to me. She finally came in, and she looked straight at me and kind of gave me a mean look. She sat in a different chair across the group from me. And so I was very kind of mystified as to, what was going on. After that, she really was mad at me because I had gone in ahead of her. She said, "This is my support group. You're my guest." It was just really kind of disproportionately angry about that. Then, just out of nowhere, she just held me back. It was kind of getting a little passionate. And then she just said, "I have to leave now." The whole thing left me feeling, this is a little weird. That whole second date was just strange.
As unnerving as the experience is, the next time Kimberly and Brian see each other, she acts as if nothing happened.
It started getting much more passionate. The chemistry between us was undeniable, and it was very powerful, and it was one that I'd not really experienced to that degree up until that point in my life. Kimberly was able to stir these feelings, in me, the passionate feelings, both physically and emotionally. I feel like I started falling in love with her pretty quickly, just because I did feel like this immediate, really strong connection.
Kimberly seems to be feeling the same way, because she treats Brian like he is a close, trusted companion.
Kimberly has a court date with her ex-husband, and he's going for full custody.
She wanted me to testify in court for her as a character witness. And at this point, I had known her for maybe 2 months. So I went to the courthouse with her, and when she was in the hearing, one of her friends gave me a copy of her psychological report. I read through the report, but so much of it, I didn't know what to make of it. Like, it had a lot of psychological terms that I wasn't familiar with, such as narcissism and borderline personality disorder.
Now, borderline personality disorder, that's the mother of all disorders. That's everything combined into one.
And individuals with borderline personality disorder have affective instability. They have emotions that are unstable. This is somebody who is highly impulsive, dramatic, has an intense fear of abandonment, and furthermore expresses typically some type of violence. It can be verbal aggression, physical aggression.
I was very conflicted about the whole report and wasn't sure what to make of it. She told me that her husband paid off psychologists to make fabricated psychological reports. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this is a professional psychologist, and they don't just fabricate reports. And so I thought there was something there that I needed to be careful about.
The judge rules against Kimberly, and she is devastated. Brian feels for her and doesn't question her about the report.
I didn't want to have another failed relationship. In my previous marriage, I didn't get to fight for that relationship at all. So I didn't want to just walk away from the relationship, but kind of fight for it and do the best I possibly could to make it work.
The couple continue to see each other but live separately. Brian walks on eggshells to avoid Kimberly's bad temper.
If I said anything at all positive about my ex-wife, she would often jump all over that and say something pretty mean and nasty about her. Kimberly would often try to undermine my relationship with my ex-wife because she felt like it was threatening her relationship with me. Kimberly always could escalate, just acted very aggressively.
Really, what you have here is a powder keg. She's always exploding in this fit of rage if she doesn't get her way. She screams, she yells, it's my way or no way.
That was making me very unhappy. I started feeling that, okay, I don't think I need to be in this relationship. This relationship is starting to be something that's negative for me.
5 months into the relationship, Brian is ready to make a clean break.
We just had one fight too many, and I had finally solidified my resolve that I was going to break up. So I knew I was going to have this conversation with her. I'd kind of prepared for it mentally. I don't care what she says, I'm done with this. I was actually feeling pretty good about it. I was feeling a little bit of a sense of relief that I had kind of dodged a bullet. Okay, I'm going to put this behind me, just move on. I was about to say, all right, I'm done with this. I'm not seeing you anymore. Don't call me, etc. And that's when she told me she was pregnant.
I'm pregnant.
I felt like I was at the beginning of a horrible, horrible journey.
Just as Brian Cargill is about to break up with his girlfriend Kimberly, she tells him she is pregnant.
In that moment, my entire body just dropped, and it felt like kind of falling over a cliff. It's this flush of dread that just completely fills you and overwhelms you. But my first thought was, okay, we're gonna make this work. We're gonna take this curveball and we're gonna hit it out of the park. I mean, I'm not gonna walk away from a woman that is carrying my child. I'm just not gonna do that. And so I did propose to her the idea that, I will stick by you during the pregnancy. I want to be a part of the child's life no matter what, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be married to do that. And she put it to me very plainly.
You'll never see me again.
If you don't marry me, you're not having anything to do with this child. Period.
It is the ultimate blackmail. Guess what? I'm pregnant. And now you're stuck. anything is possible with this woman. She'll do anything.
I felt like I'd put myself in a situation where I didn't really have a lot of a choice. The value of being a parent had to trump really everything else. A couple days later, we went out and had a nice little engagement dinner. In that moment, I tried to get as much out of it as I could, get as much joy and celebration as I could, and kind of leave the other stuff behind. And even though it wasn't going to be as pure as I wanted originally, still could be something.
The fact that he stays with her after all of this is a huge testament to his character. But it also tells her, I can do anything I want to this guy. And you know what? He's gonna stick around. Why? Because he has a conscience. She doesn't.
In June of 1994, Brian and Kimberly have a small, intimate wedding in New Mexico.
We had a little wedding at my mom's house, and I tried to maintain an air of kind of celebration and that I was happy about it and everything, but deep inside, I was really scared and just dreading kind of what was to come. To the point where right after the ceremony, I kind of went in the back of the house and just kind of had a good cry and just kind of let out so many of these emotions that I was having there.
The couple move in together, and a few months later in November, Kimberly gives birth to their son, Jamie.
After Jamie was born, I was jubilant. And so it was kind of a nice period of time. It was pretty calm, relatively peaceful. I felt a sense of relief that maybe this was gonna start to be okay. Maybe we can make this work. But then things really kind of went downhill. I remember one time I had gone into the bedroom and locked the bedroom door because I was trying to kind of get away from her. So she started like kicking the door. And so I was like, okay, this is not good. So I opened the door and I walked out. And then this hammer comes just whizzes by my head and sticks into the wall. And I turned around and I looked at her, and she had kind of this wild look in her eyes.
The hammer lodges itself in the wall, and what does she do? She leaves it there. She tells him, don't you touch that hammer. Why? She wants to remind him, if you don't do what I say, there's gonna be a price.
And I just remember just this horrible feeling just washed over me about, man, what am I doing? How am I ever gonna like get through this? It was just definitely just the low point in my life.
Kimberly's violent streak is only just beginning.
We were sitting in a car and she got angry with me because of a conversation we were having, and she, with her fist, just punched me as hard as she could in the face. It was just such a shock that I just said, I'm done. That punch in the face was really just the final straw. I just got out of the car and I left and never went back.
Brian immediately files for divorce from Kimberly. Over the following months, the battle for custody of his son becomes emotional warfare, with Kimberly pulling out all the stops to make Brian's life miserable.
Brian, this is Kimberly. I'm sick of being hung up on. The only reason why I tried you at 7:45 at work is because I had been trying your other number since last night.
So at this point, she was not working at all. And she would call me all the time. At some point, I started creating a phone log all the times that she called me. I counted one day, like literally 50 times she called me at work.
I'm just disgusted with your treatment of me. I'm disgusted with your ulterior motives.
She would call and I would say, I'm busy. And then she would start threatening the receptionist. It was just insanity. Eventually, I decided to leave my first job just because she had called me at work so many times. But I was giving her basically all my money. I was still paying her rent and like giving her probably 75% of my paycheck every month. That was a tough time.
Brian can't afford a lawyer and sees Jamie at Kimberly's whim during the divorce process. When the dust settles in 1995, he gets shared custody of Jamie, but Kimberly continues to make life difficult.
She would kind of do a bait and switch in terms of visitation with my son.
I'm not keeping him from you, but I'm not going to allow him to go off overnight until several matters are mediated.
That was the big thing, was I was always at her mercy when I could see him. One time, she got really mad at me and decided I wasn't going to see Jamie anymore, ever. I showed up at her house, and she wouldn't give him to me.
It doesn't make any sense why you would drive all the way out here knowing that I'm not going to turn Jamie over.
Another time, I came anyway, even though she said she wasn't going to let me have him, and then she just let me have him. So she just liked to play games with the visitation.
It's a tough blow for Brian.
I loved my son before he was born. To see him and spend time with him, it's almost like a spiritual, you know what that connection is like.
Really, the only hold that she has over Brian now is the child, but that's a huge piece of leverage. She has a piece of Brian's heart. She knows the guy is a caring individual and that he loves his child. So she is totally using this child to manipulate the guy.
Over the years, Jamie pays a steep price for being Brian's son.
I was concerned. A lot of times he would call me asking me for help. He would tell me things that were alarming. Like, she started screaming at me, and so I ran out the door and ran down the street to someone's phone to call.
Hey, Daddy, it's me. I'm scared.
Those kinds of calls are gut-wrenching. I was really scared for him.
When he's just 11 years old, Jamie makes a chilling confession to Brian.
They had this big physical conflict. She put a belt around his neck.
She wraps a belt and drags the kid around the room. Let me drag him around the room, cut off his oxygen to let him know who the boss is. Could it get any more violent than that?
Jamie was at the point where he thought he was going to be strangled. He thought that his life was going to end. So it was a dramatic escalation in violence.
Sorry. I saw outright abuse that leaves bruises, marks. I was horrified. What parent wouldn't be horrified to see their child injured?
When Brian hears about this, that's it. He's got to take that kid out of that house. He has to. When you look at all of this building up, what is she gonna do next? What's left? Murder?
Brian Cargill has just found out that his 11-year-old son has been physically abused by his ex-wife, Kimberly.
I finally had evidence, like hardcore, irrefutable evidence that I could take to a judge and make some progress. I took photographs of the abuse and then immediately went to an attorney.
Brian reports Kimberly to Child Protective Services, providing them with proof of her abuse. And 10 years after the divorce in 2006, he finally gains full custody of Jamie.
It was a positive step, for sure. At least now I had some sense of stability with my son.
But shockingly, the courts still allow Kimberly unsupervised visitation.
He would go to her house every other weekend. And there was always that worry for him.
With the system failing his son, Brian remains vigilant and keeps a watchful eye on Kimberly. But soon, he finds a measure of peace after meeting a woman worthy of his love.
We met and kind of hit it off, and after that, that was it. It's like we didn't really date anyone else. From our first date, we were pretty much, okay, this is it. I knew that she would make my life better. She is truly like the most emotionally stable person I know. So for me, that was a big, as you can imagine, that was a big priority.
Kimberly moves on with her life as well. She goes to nursing school and marries another man. They have a son.
Happy first birthday. We love you, Keith, Jill, Madeline, and Hayden.
But it doesn't last. Soon, Kimberly is divorced and engaged in yet another custody battle. This time, it will turn deadly. The trouble begins when she decides to hire a babysitter for her 4-year-old son while she's at work as a licensed nurse.
A friend of hers mentions a woman, Cherry Walker, in an apartment building not far from where she lives. By all accounts, she's just this wonderful, warm, 39-year-old woman.
Cherry was described as a very friendly, agreeable individual who had an interest in babysitting. Cherry had an IQ of 56, so this is profoundly developmentally disabled. So she was operating at a 6th grade level. So someone who could arguably be very easily manipulated.
She's living in an apartment by herself for the first time in her life. She has an aide that visits her at the apartment to make sure she's doing okay. And in walks Kimberly Cargill. The devil walks into Cherry Walker's life. And it's never going to be the same again.
Cherry is unable to say no to Kimberly, who takes advantage of her kindness.
Kimberly would drop the son off at Cherry's apartment and just leave him there for hours, come back super late or the next morning to pick him up. Cherry was on a very fixed income given her disability. She relied on food stamps to buy food for herself. And so she had this little boy at her house who would be dropped off hungry. Kimberly didn't leave any money for food, so Cherry would share hers.
Kimberly found someone she could exploit at will. Hey, can I drop the kid off for 2 hours? She'd come back 8 hours later. Or she'd drop the child off and maybe not show up for 2-3 days.
Thanks a lot for
She knew that Cherry Walker really wasn't going to say anything about this, that she could just continually do this over and over and over again.
The boy's father accuses Kimberly of abusing their son.
Kimberly Cargill's child is being abused, and social services gets involved, and they open an investigation against her.
In March of 2010, Child Protective Services removes Kimberly's son from her home. A custody hearing is ordered, and Cherry Walker is unwittingly caught up in the legal battle.
The court subpoena Cherry Walker to testify in court against Kimberly Cargill.
Cherry receives a subpoena as a frequent caretaker of the little boy. Immediately, Kimberly becomes concerned because if Cherry Walker is taking the stand in court, it'll become quickly evident that Kimberly's really not fit to be caring for a young child.
I think that Kimberly was specifically worried about Cherry's testimony because Cherry was probably going to say something truthful, saying that she was a bad mother and violent.
Cherry's taking care of that child. She had seen the abuse and the neglect that Kimberly Cargill perpetrated against that child. She was really the best witness.
I think that Kimberly believed everything was riding on this particular hearing. This was the last son she had custody of. This was her last hope to prove that she was a competent mother. This was her last chance.
Kimberly's first reaction is to just blow up Cherry Walker's phone. She actually calls her over 70 times, so she's panicking.
Cherry is not the only person who Kimberly is frantically calling. On June 18, 2010, just 5 days before Kimberly's custody hearing is set to begin, she phones her ex, Brian.
I was on the way out of town with my wife going on a long weekend, and Kimberly called me. I saw it was her and I didn't answer. She left a message on my voicemail. It was a bit frantic. Have you been subpoenaed? What are you going to tell them if they subpoena you? It was a little strange, but I just kind of disregarded it. Kimberly was really the last person that I wanted to hear from.
The next day, on June 19th, a driver on a small country road makes a tragic discovery.
This young guy is out delivering pizza. He's driving down the road and he realizes he went past the address, so he has to do a turnaround. He heads into this gravel area where it's an open field, and then he looks and he sees what appears to be a body. So of course, he dials 911, and in come the crime scene guys.
Investigators rush to the scene.
They find a woman face down, and it appears that she had been burned. Her body has been charred. Her skin is actually peeling off. It's been burned so badly. And in between her legs, they find this empty creamer container. It's not burned. They also determine that the victim has not been there long, probably within 24 hours.
Investigators determined that this person likely died of homicidal violence because this body was so badly burned, they couldn't identify who it was.
Detectives can't find an ID anywhere near the body, so they put out a media alert in hopes of getting any information on their Jane Doe. Across town, Guthrie and Rowan Walker, a pastor and his wife, reach out to police. Their beloved daughter has been missing for 24 hours.
This is a daughter who is constantly in touch with them. There's not maybe 4 hours that go by that they don't know where she is. Nobody has seen her. And there's one thing their daughter never does, and that is miss church. But on this day, she never shows up. And this is when they begin to realize something's drastically wrong here. So where is she? A media report goes out of this victim that's found, and they just know in their heart and their soul that it's her. So they go to the police, and sure enough, it's their daughter, Cherry Walker.
Smith County sheriffs have identified a burned female victim as Cherry Walker by using her dental records. Brian Cargill finds out about Cherry's murder when he gets a call from Kimberly's mother.
That kind of blew me away. It was pretty surreal. And I immediately kind of made the connection with Kimberly. Maybe she had something to do with this. Jamie and I went into hiding immediately. It was surreal for sure. I never imagined that I would be in that kind of a situation where I'd be afraid that someone was gonna come and attack us. It was a scary thought, that maybe she had gotten into this manic state and was ready to come out and kill everyone she knew.
Investigators conduct a search of Cherry Walker's apartment, looking for leads.
They're looking around, and they discover several voicemails. They're from a woman named Kim, who says, "Hey, Cherry, I have to talk to you." And she sounds a bit frantic.
Cell phone records also showed that this number had called Cherry over and over and over and over. There were dozens upon dozens of phone calls to Cherry Walker the day before she went missing.
So investigators immediately need to find out, who is this Kim? They interview Cherry Walker's aide, and they ask her, "Do you know anybody named Kim?" "Oh yeah, I know somebody named Kim. That's Kimberly Cargill." So now they're getting somewhere.
Cherry's caregiver was one of the last people to see her before she went missing, and during the course of questioning her, police learn about the situation with Kimberly Cargill, the babysitting arrangement, the subpoena, and the child custody hearing. She says Kimberly told Cherry not to go to court, to ignore the subpoena, but Cherry wanted to follow the rules. She was really concerned about getting in trouble.
She's scared. Kimberly is blowing up Cherry's phone, calling, and she wants to meet with Cherry to discuss the situation.
In Cherry's last conversation with the caregiver, Cherry says Kimberly is going to come over, she's going to take me out to dinner, and Cherry's caregiver tells her, do not go, lock the door, go to bed, do not answer if Kimberly comes to your house, and don't go anywhere with her.
She goes, listen, ignore Kim, get some sleep, and tomorrow we'll deal with all of this. But for Cherry Walker, tomorrow never comes. The aide never sees her again.
Investigators head directly to Kimberly's house to speak with her.
She comes to the door and they say, hey, listen, we want to talk to you about Cherry Walker. And she says, I don't think I should talk to you without my lawyer. That's a red flag. If you're a friend of this woman's, why wouldn't you want to talk to us?
Kimberly maintained her arrogant disposition the whole way. The police wanted to search the house, and Kimberly would not permit them.
So investigators park down the street. They sit in their car, and they wait for Kim Cargill to leave. She leaves. She starts driving. Kimberly is really frantic. She's totally out of her mind. And she blows through a stop sign. So they pull her over. And immediately, what do they notice in her car? One of those creamer containers. And what do they have at their crime scene where Cherry Walker was dumped? They have that same empty container of creamer. So there's a connection. They seize her car, and they tow that car to forensics.
While the forensics team searches Kimberly's car for evidence, police execute a search warrant for her home.
Investigators made note that the house was messy. There were dirty clothes, trash everywhere, pieces of food on the floor, used takeout, fast food containers, trash in the bathtub. It was very unclean and disarray.
And then they go into the laundry room. They see laundry piled up from probably weeks. But in the washing machine, there's one sheet. Kim Cargill was washing one sheet? Question mark. Why? At the crime scene, they found these tire tracks, and those match perfectly to Kimberly Cargill's vehicle. They also find that Kimberly's DNA matches the DNA found on the coffee creamer container found between Cherry Walker's legs. They have now connected Kimberly Cargill to the murder scene and to the body. She is arrested, and they charge her with capital felony murder. She's dead to rights. There's no doubt in their mind that Kimberly Cargill murdered Cherry Walker.
Kimberly Cargill has been arrested and charged in the brutal murder of her son's babysitter, 39-year-old Cherry Walker.
It was a big relief when she was arrested. We all kind of were able to breathe a little better, sleep a little bit better at night. There was really not a doubt in my mind that she was guilty.
In May of 2012, Kimberly's case goes to trial in Smith County. By this time, and much to Brian's relief, Kimberly has had minimal contact with her son, Jamie.
As a prosecutor, I believe she killed Cherry Walker, and I wanted to get justice for Cherry. I believed in the evidence. When you have an item with the DNA sample, that belongs to Kim Cargill, and Kim Cargill knows Cherry Walker, and Cherry Walker was going to be picked up by her that night. You know, it's not hard to put two and two together on this. You just dumped a body, killed someone and dumped a body, and set it on fire.
It appears that Kimberly Cargill strangled Cherry Walker inside her house, wrapped her in a sheet, took her out into that field by the road, untangled her from the sheet, poured some sort of accelerant on her, and lit her on fire to cover up forensic evidence.
She killed her. She dumped her body and burned it so she wouldn't get caught. It all supports everything that common sense tells you. That Kim didn't want Cherry to testify. She didn't want her to go to that hearing because she felt like it was going to be a problem. And then all of a sudden, Cherry's dead. So, it all fits.
Kimberly takes the stand in her own defense and pleads not guilty.
Her defense was that she was there when Cherry Walker died, but she did not kill her. She said that she took Cherry out to dinner to talk about the whole situation.
She says she's driving down the road and Cherry Walker had a seizure and that she could not save her or revive her from it. She died.
She said she drove around in a panic, dumped the body into a field, and burned it because she was afraid, even though she said she didn't kill her, she would get blamed for it, so she tried to dispose of the body.
There's a point where Kimberly's behavior kind of borders on delusional. She was supremely confident in her ability to escape responsibility, to manipulate. She thinks that the jury is going to look at this excuse and say, oh, that makes sense. Your friend dies, so you set them on fire and dump their body.
Brian Cargill is called as a witness for the prosecution.
When I was in court testifying and on the stand, I did not want to look at her. I was aware of her, but I never really looked her in the eye. I just had no need for that. What she had done was horrible. She took someone else's life, which is hard to even really fathom.
The jury quickly comes back with a verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Kimberly Cargill, guilty of the offense of capital murder as charged in the indictment.
The verdict came in, I felt relieved that Kim had been held accountable for what she did.
Kimberly Cargill is found guilty on all counts of capital felony murder, and they vote for the death penalty.
It didn't surprise me at all that she would get the death penalty. She took advantage of Cherry to that degree and then turned around and killed her. I mean, that's just outrageous. It really is outrageous.
In the aftermath of the sentencing, those who knew Kimberly are left wondering how she could have committed such a heinous act.
That always stuck out to me, that we had this spectrum of goodness and kindness and a sweet person cross paths with everything that was bad and evil. Kim was someone who had no empathy for others, no feelings of regret or remorse for anything she did.
Kimberly was nothing but a menace who abused Brian and abused her children. I think she is one of the most vindictive, violent female psychopaths ever. Brian Cargill should consider himself lucky, and he should count his blessings because he was sleeping with the devil. Only the devil decided not to kill him, but to kill somebody else.
Even though she met a tragic end, Cherry's light will never be forgotten.
When the trial concluded, there was a photo in evidence of Cherry. She was smiling, she was happy. I printed that photo, I put it in a frame. I wanted that photo in my office to remember as a prosecutor why you do it. Her father told me that I never thought lawyers or law enforcement would care about a mentally handicapped Black woman. It hurt me that he had to carry that with him. It broke my heart. I was very proud that we were able to get justice for her, show him that we did care deeply for your daughter. She was a beautiful woman. We fought hard for her, and now Kim will be held accountable for what she did.
As for Brian, he's moved on from the turmoil and found a silver lining in his life.
You know, they say time heals all wounds. It's a cliche, but I think every single day heals a little bit more. My kids have really taught me kind of how to love, if you will. Jamie, he's doing much better now. He's a chef. He's got a good job, and he's adulting, which is what we raise him for. We live in a household of 5, my wife and I, and 3 dogs. It's great. I mean, I don't have any complaints. We're able to live life pretty stress-free and, you know, do what we want to do. And so, you know, I feel pretty good.
The call comes in just after midnight, a voice breaking through the static, breathless, uncertain, asking a question no one in that small Texas town has heard in years. What if the thing you buried in the past never stayed buried at all? What if the truth has been awake all this time, waiting for someone to finally lose the strength to keep quiet? The road outside is empty, a long stretch of asphalt glowing under yellow streetlights, and somewhere beyond it sits a house that has never been the same since the summer of 2001. Since the night a door was left unlocked, since the moment a life slipped out of reach and into silence. This is a cold case now, a phrase that sounds clinical, harmless even, but everyone here knows what it really means. Years of unanswered questions, years of whispered theories, years of waking up in the same town where something went terribly wrong and was never made right. Back then, Texas was sweltering under a heat that refused to break even after sunset. The air clung to skin, heavy and suffocating, the kind of night where nothing moves unless it has to. The neighborhood was quiet in that familiar way. Porch lights glowing, television murmurs leaking through windows, dogs barking at shadows they couldn't explain. The victim lived just 2 blocks from the main road, close enough to hear trucks downshifting in the distance, far enough that screams, if there were any, would have been swallowed by the dark. Friends would later say nothing felt unusual that evening. No alarms, no sense of danger, just another ordinary night, until it wasn't. When the disappearance was discovered, it didn't come with drama or flashing lights. It arrived slowly, creeping in through unanswered phone calls, through a car still parked where it shouldn't have been, through a routine that suddenly broke. By the time police stepped inside the house, the silence was already thick, pressing in from every corner. A half-finished drink on the counter, shoes by the door, no signs of a struggle that made sense. It was as if someone had simply stepped out for a moment and forgotten to come back. That absence, more than any bloodstain or shattered glass, set off the first wave of fear. Investigators moved carefully at first, cataloging details that would later take on a terrible weight. Windows locked, no forced entry, a phone unplugged from the wall. Neighbors questioned, each one replaying the night in their head, searching for something they might have missed. A strange car, a noise out of place, anything. But memory is slippery, especially when fear gets involved. Stories shifted, timelines blurred. What remained constant was the sense that this wasn't random, that whoever was responsible knew the house, knew the routines, knew how to disappear without leaving a trail that could be followed. The town responded the way small towns often do when something unthinkable happens. Posters went up on telephone poles and grocery store boards. Candlelight vigils gathered people who barely spoke to each other before, now standing shoulder to shoulder in the heat, eyes reflecting flames and shared dread. Parents pulled their children closer. Doors were locked earlier. Strangers were watched a little longer than before. And always, in hushed conversations, the same words surfaced again and again. Cold case, missing, no answers. Police worked the angles they could. Friends were interviewed until voices went hoarse. Coworkers were asked to account for hours that suddenly mattered more than they ever had. Family members were scrutinized under a light that felt unforgiving, invasive, necessary. Every relationship was dissected, every argument revisited, every secret dragged into the open. But nothing stuck. Tips came in, some sincere, some cruel, some clearly fueled by rumor rather than fact. Each one was followed, logged, and eventually set aside. Weeks turned into months, months into years. The case file grew thicker, heavier, a physical reminder of how much effort had been spent chasing something that refused to be caught. As time passed, the investigation slowed, not because anyone stopped caring, but because leads dried up. Evidence that might have mattered degraded. Witnesses moved away. Memories faded. People learned how to live with uncertainty. The house changed hands. The posters came down. New families moved in, unaware at first of the history soaked into the walls. To outsiders, it became just another story, another unsolved mystery filed away under a date and a location. To those who lived there, it never stopped being personal. The family carried that weight every day. Birthdays passed without celebrations. Holidays arrived with an empty chair that no one dared to fill. Hope became something fragile, handled carefully, because hoping too much hurt worse when nothing came of it. They learned the language of police updates that said nothing, the careful phrasing that meant there was still no progress, still no answers. They learned to recognize the sound of their own phone ringing late at night, the way the heart jumps before the mind can catch up, the way disappointment settles in when it's just another wrong number. Rumors, of course, never stopped. In bars and backyards, theories flourished. Some said it was a drifter, passing through at the wrong moment. Others insisted it had to be someone local, someone trusted. Names were whispered, then dismissed, then whispered again years later when nothing else made sense. Each rumor cut in a different way, reopening wounds that never fully healed. The police heard them all. They noted them. They waited for something concrete, something that could stand up in the cold light of a courtroom. It never came. By the time the case was officially labeled cold, the word had lost its meaning to the family. Cold suggested distance, detachment, a lack of feeling. What they experienced was the opposite. A constant, low-burning ache that flared unexpectedly, triggered by a song on the radio, a familiar laugh heard in a crowd, a face that looked just close enough to make the heart race. The past was never really past here. It was woven into daily life, an invisible presence that refused to be ignored. Years later, new detectives would pull the file from storage, dust rising as it was opened again. Fresh eyes scanned old notes, re-examined photographs, questioned decisions made under pressure long ago. Technology had changed. Methods had evolved. What once seemed insignificant now stood out in sharper relief. A comment dismissed as unreliable. A timeline that didn't quite add up. A name that appeared too often to be coincidence. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the case began to shift, not toward resolution, but away from complete stagnation. And then, without warning, the phone rang. It wasn't a dramatic confession shouted across a police station desk. It was quiet, hesitant. A person on the other end of the line who sounded tired, older, carrying something heavy for a long time. They didn't give details at first. Just enough to make detectives sit up straighter. Just enough to send a ripple through a department that had learned not to expect miracles. The words came carefully, as if once spoken they could never be taken back. There was fear in that voice, but also something else, something close to relief. News didn't reach the family right away. Police moved cautiously, aware of how many times hope had been raised only to be crushed. They verified what they could, cross-checked statements against facts that had gathered dust for 2 decades. Each match sent a jolt through the room. Each inconsistency sparked debate. This wasn't closure yet. This was possibility, dangerous and intoxicating. The kind that keeps people awake at night, staring at files spread across a table, wondering if this time, finally, the truth was within reach. Outside, the town slept, unaware that the story it thought it knew was beginning to change. The same streets, the same houses, the same quiet darkness, now charged with a tension that hadn't been felt in years. Somewhere, a family was about to be forced back into a moment they had tried so hard to survive. Somewhere, a secret that had lasted for decades was starting to crack, and once cracks appear, they have a way of spreading, no matter how tightly you try to hold things together. The morning after the call, the police station feels different, charged with a nervous energy that doesn't show on the surface but hums beneath every conversation. Every glance exchanged across desks piled with paper. Detectives speak in lower voices. Doors stay closed a little longer than usual, and the old case file sits open again, its edges worn soft by time, its pages yellowed but suddenly alive. The name on the cover hasn't changed since 2001, but the meaning has, because for the first time in years, the story is moving forward instead of looping back on itself. What was once a cold case, frozen in uncertainty, is beginning to thaw, and everyone knows that thawing can be dangerous, that it can release things better left buried. They start where they always do, with the voice on the phone. Who was it? Where were they calling from? Why now? The questions stack up quickly, but the answers come slowly, cautiously, as if the person on the other end is testing how much truth they can afford to give away. The confession, if it can even be called that yet, isn't clean or dramatic. It's fragmented, interrupted by long pauses, by breaths taken to steady shaking hands. It circles the truth without landing on it, hinting at involvement without stating it outright. Enough to demand attention, enough to make ignoring it impossible. As investigators dig in, they begin connecting threads that once seemed unrelated. A vehicle sighting that was dismissed because no one could agree on the color. A late-night argument overheard by a neighbor who couldn't remember exact words. A financial transaction that raised eyebrows but never crossed a legal line. Alone, each detail was forgettable. Together, they form a pattern that feels uncomfortably deliberate. The past rearranges itself under this new light, and suddenly the question isn't how the crime happened, but how close everyone might have been to the answer without realizing it. The family is called in that afternoon. The request is careful, respectful, almost apologetic. There's no promise made, no assurance that this time will be different. Just a need to talk, to share an update that can't be delivered over the phone. They arrive with guarded expressions, bodies tense, braced for disappointment. They've learned the cost of hope, learned how quickly it can turn against you. Sitting across from the detectives, they listen as words like new information and renewed investigation are spoken with measured restraint. No one uses the word solved. Not yet, but the air in the room shifts anyway, heavy with the weight of what might finally be coming. Outside the station, rumors begin to stir. Someone saw police near a house they haven't visited in years. Someone heard a name mentioned in a place it hadn't been mentioned before. In a town this size, information doesn't travel. It leaks, seeping through cracks until it's everywhere, distorted by fear and curiosity. People who thought they were done with the case find themselves pulled back in, replaying old conversations, wondering if they missed something obvious. The past resurfaces in ways no one asked for, dragging memories into the open that had been carefully sealed away. Investigators return to the original scene, not physically, but through photographs and reports, reconstructing the night piece by piece. The unlocked door that once seemed like a minor detail now feels intentional. The unplugged phone takes on a new significance. Even the absence of chaos begins to look calculated, a sign of control rather than chance. They imagine the quiet of that night, the way fear might have been contained, suppressed, carried out of the house without a sound. It's a disturbing exercise, but a necessary one, because understanding intent means understanding who could have pulled it off. The person who called back then was part of the landscape, not an outsider drifting through. They knew the rhythms of the place, the expectations, the blind spots. They knew how long it would take before anyone noticed something was wrong. That realization settles heavily over the investigation, because it means the answer was never far away, just hidden in plain sight. Trust becomes the unspoken theme of every conversation. Trust misplaced, trust abused, trust that once broken can never fully be repaired. Days turn into weeks as the renewed investigation gains momentum. Old witnesses are contacted again, some reluctantly, some with a surprising eagerness to finally unburden themselves. Time has changed them. Age has softened some defenses, hardened others. What they say now isn't always what they said then, and that discrepancy matters. Detectives listen closely, aware that memory is unreliable but patterns are not. Each interview adds another layer to a picture that is finally beginning to make sense, even as it becomes more unsettling. The caller remains just out of reach, cooperating but cautious, offering pieces of information like concessions rather than confessions. They speak of fear, of consequences, of lives built on silence. They hint at moments of weakness, at nights spent staring at the ceiling, at the constant dread of a knock on the door. Guilt seeps through the cracks in their story, unpolished and raw. Whether it's guilt for what they did or for what they allowed to happen remains unclear, but it's enough to keep the pressure on. For the family, the waiting begins again, but this time it's different. It's sharper, more immediate, like standing at the edge of something you can't see the bottom of. Every phone call feels loaded. Every update, no matter how small, carries the potential to change everything. They talk quietly among themselves, revisiting memories they've tried not to touch, wondering how they'll feel if the truth finally comes out, and whether closure, after so long, will feel like relief or just another kind of pain. The town watches from a distance, pretending not to care while caring deeply. People recognize that if this case can break open after so many years, then nothing is as settled as it seems. The idea is unsettling, the thought that secrets can survive decades only to surface when least expected. The word cold case takes on a new meaning here, no longer a symbol of failure or finality, but a reminder that time doesn't erase the truth, it just delays its arrival. And as investigators prepare for the next step, the next conversation, the next risk, one thing becomes painfully clear. Whatever happened that night in 2001 didn't end when the victim disappeared. It rippled outward, through families, through friendships, through an entire community that learned how to live with unanswered questions. Now, with the past cracking open, those ripples are returning, stronger than before, threatening to pull everyone back into the moment they thought they had escaped. The pressure tightens quietly, almost politely, the way it does when everyone involved understands that the next move could change lives. Detectives begin to map relationships that once seemed ordinary, lines drawn between names that shared barbecues, holidays, favors exchanged without a second thought. In 2001, those connections were background noise, part of small-town life. Now they feel charged, dangerous, because they suggest opportunity, access, and motive woven together so closely it's hard to tell where one ends and the next begins. The case stops being about a single night and starts to look like a long, slow build-up, a convergence of moments that only make sense in hindsight. They return again and again to the hours before the disappearance, replaying them like a tape that refuses to wear out. Who saw whom? Who called whom? Who left early? Who stayed late? The timeline tightens, shrinking until there's almost no room left for coincidence. A gap appears, small but undeniable, a window where something happened that no one accounted for at the time. That gap becomes the focus, a dark space everyone circles, convinced the answer is hiding there. When they confront the caller with these details, the tone shifts. The pauses grow longer. The voice grows quieter. It's no longer about hypotheticals or vague admissions. It's about specifics, about moments that can't be explained away with uncertainty or poor memory. The caller corrects small details without thinking, a slip that doesn't go unnoticed. They know things they shouldn't, things that were never public, things only someone close to the truth would recognize. Each correction is like a fingerprint left behind, invisible to anyone not trained to see it. Still, the caller resists crossing the final line. There's talk of being there but not being responsible, of knowing but not acting, of fear that paralyzed rather than malice that drove. There's a familiar shape, this kind of half-confession, and detectives know better than to push too hard too fast. They let silence do the work, let the weight of what's been said hang in the air until it becomes unbearable. Silence, after all, has already defined this case for years. Now it's being used against the person who relied on it most. Meanwhile, the family is pulled deeper into the process. They're shown pieces of information carefully, shielded from details that might overwhelm them. But even what they do here is enough to reopen every wound. Faces they recognize from old photographs resurface in new, troubling contexts. Names once spoken casually now feel loaded, heavy with implication. Trust fractures again, this time in directions they never anticipated. The realization that someone close, someone familiar, might be tied to the disappearance is harder to process than the idea of a stranger ever was. The community reacts in its own way, outwardly calm but internally buzzing. People lower their voices when certain names come up. Long-standing grudges are revisited, past conflicts reinterpreted through a darker lens. There's an unspoken understanding that if the truth comes out, it won't just answer old questions, it will create new ones, forcing everyone to reconsider their own role, their own blindness, their own silence. No one wants to admit how easily they accepted the mystery as something unsolvable, how convenient it was to let it become just another story. As evidence is re-examined, physical details once dismissed gain importance. Fibers that didn't match anything known at the time. Marks that were explained away as incidental. The limitations of early forensic technology loom large, a reminder of how much was impossible to see back then. Now, with modern tools, those same details speak louder, telling a story that contradicts the neat explanations people settled on years ago. The past is no longer quiet. It's arguing back. The caller's fear becomes more apparent with each conversation. They ask about statutes, about immunity, about what happens if they tell everything. It's not the fear of an innocent person dragged into something they don't understand. It's the fear of consequences long postponed, of a life built on omission finally collapsing under the weight of truth. Detectives hear it in the way the voice tightens when certain names are mentioned, in the way breath catches when timelines overlap too neatly. Behind closed doors, discussions turn strategic. There's enough here to apply pressure, but not yet enough to act decisively. Warrants are considered, then delayed. Surveillance is subtle, designed to observe without alarming. Every move is calculated because tipping off the wrong person could send the truth retreating back into silence. The case has waited this long. Can't afford impatience now. For the family, nights become restless again. Sleep comes in fragments, interrupted by memories and what-ifs. They talk about the victim in ways they haven't in years, sharing stories that had felt too painful to revisit. There's comfort in remembering, but also fear, because remembering makes the possibility of answers feel more real, and real answers mean confronting whatever waits on the other side. Closure has been a distant concept for so long that its sudden proximity is almost frightening. As the investigation edges closer to something solid, one thing is undeniable. The confession, sudden and unexpected, has changed everything. It has shifted the balance, disturbed a long-standing equilibrium built on not knowing. The cold case is no longer dormant. It's awake, stretching, demanding attention. And with every passing day, the question grows louder, echoing through files and conversations and sleepless nights alike. If the truth is finally ready to surface, will everyone involved be able to survive what it reveals? The fourth week of renewed investigation arrives with a sense of inevitability, the feeling that something long delayed is finally catching up to itself. Detectives no longer ask whether the case has momentum, they ask how much force it will unleash when it breaks. Conversations shift from speculation to preparation, from what might have happened to how the truth, once exposed, will land in a town that has learned to live with half-answers. Every decision feels heavier now, because there is no returning to the quiet ignorance that defined the years before the call. They begin to narrow their focus, filtering out distractions that once clogged the investigation. Certain names fade, others grow sharper, rising to the surface with uncomfortable clarity. Patterns emerge in behavior that once looked ordinary. Who avoided police contact back then, who offered help too eagerly, who seemed to know what questions to ask before anyone else did. The case stops feeling abstract. It becomes personal, grounded in choices made by real people who walked the same streets as everyone else, who shared the same spaces, who blended in so well they were almost invisible. The caller's story evolves under scrutiny. Details that were once vague harden into specifics, and with specificity comes risk. Times, locations, sequences of events fall into place with an accuracy that can't be explained away as guesswork. The caller speaks of moments of panic, of decisions made too quickly, of consequences underestimated. There is still resistance, still an attempt to frame involvement as secondary, but the narrative no longer floats free of the facts. It's tethered now, anchored by evidence that refuses to let it drift. investigators revisit people who were once considered peripheral. A neighbor who moved away shortly after the disappearance. An acquaintance whose alibi relied heavily on someone who has since died. A relationship that ended abruptly around the same time, for reasons that were never fully explained. Each interview adds pressure, not just on those being questioned, but on the caller, who begins to realize how much of the past is being pulled back into the light. Secrets thought safe because of time start to feel fragile, brittle. The family is updated again, this time with a gravity that leaves little room for doubt. The tone has changed. There's still caution, still no promises, but there is also a clear acknowledgement that the investigation has crossed a threshold. The family listens in silence, absorbing the information, feeling the ground shift beneath them. Anger surfaces alongside hope, directed not just at the possibility of a perpetrator, but at the years of waiting, the years of living with uncertainty while someone else carried the truth. In the community, the atmosphere tightens. People sense that something is coming, even if they don't know what it is. Old friendships are strained by suspicion. Casual conversations become careful, measured. The idea that the answer might be close is as unsettling as it is relieving. For years, the mystery provided a strange kind of unity, a shared sorrow without a target. Now, the prospect of accountability threatens to fracture that fragile peace. Forensic analysis plays a quiet but crucial role. Items preserved from the original investigation, once thought to hold little value, are re-examined with modern techniques. Results come back slowly, methodically, each one adding weight to the emerging picture. The science doesn't offer drama or instant resolution. It offers confirmation, reinforcement, the kind of support that turns a story into a case that can stand on its own. The past, filtered through new technology, becomes clearer, more precise, less forgiving. The caller's fear deepens as these developments unfold. They ask fewer questions and listen more, an indication that they understand the direction things are moving. There's talk of family, of responsibilities, of the life they've built since 2001. It's an appeal without being one, a reminder that consequences won't be isolated to a single person. Detectives hear it but remain unmoved. Empathy has its place, but so does accountability, and this case has waited too long for the latter to be ignored. Behind closed doors, the possibility of arrest is discussed seriously for the first time. Not as a distant goal, but as an approaching reality. Legal thresholds are examined, evidence weighed with precision. Every piece must align because a mistake now could unravel everything. The pressure is immense, but so is the resolve. No one wants to be responsible for letting the truth slip away again. For the family, anticipation becomes almost unbearable. The days stretch, filled with anxious waiting and constant reflection. They imagine conversations they've rehearsed in their minds for years, words they never thought they would have the chance to say. They also imagine the opposite, the chance that this momentum could stall, that they might be left once again with nothing but questions. The emotional whiplash is exhausting, but there is no way to step off the ride now. As the investigation tightens its grip, the case transforms from a story about loss into a test of endurance for everyone involved. The silence that once protected the truth is eroding, replaced by a tension that hums through the town like an electrical current. Something is about to give. Whether it will be a full confession, a formal charge, or another devastating near-miss remains uncertain. What is certain is that the past is no longer content to stay buried, and the longer it's unearthed, the more dangerous it becomes. By the time the fifth phase of the investigation begins, the word cold no longer fits. There is nothing distant or dormant about this case now. It breathes in every hallway of the station, follows detectives home at night, settles into conversations they never finish. Files are no longer stacked neatly on shelves. They are spread out, compared, argued over. Their contents weighed again and again because each detail might be the one that finally tips the balance. Time, which once protected the truth, has turned against it. The caller's cooperation becomes inconsistent, oscillating between moments of openness and sudden withdrawal. One day they answer questions with a clarity that feels like progress, the next they retreat into careful, rehearsed responses. Detectives recognize the pattern immediately. It's the rhythm of someone negotiating with themselves, measuring how much they can give without destroying everything they've built since 2001. The past presses in, and the present offers fewer and fewer places to hide. New witness statements begin to align in unsettling ways. People who had no connection to each other, who lived on opposite sides of town, recall similar details once thought unreliable. A vehicle idling longer than necessary, a figure moving with purpose, not panic. A sense, difficult to articulate, that something was wrong even before anyone knew it was. These fragments, scattered across years and memories, start to fit together with uncomfortable precision. Coincidence becomes increasingly difficult to argue. The family is informed that the investigation has entered what detectives call a critical stage. It's not a phrase meant for comfort. It's a warning, a way of saying that whatever happens next will be irreversible. The family feels it immediately, the shift from abstract possibility to imminent reality. Emotions collide without warning. Relief, dread, anger, hope, all competing for space. They've lived with uncertainty for so long that certainty, even the promise of it, feels almost foreign. In the community, tension manifests in subtle ways. People avoid certain places. Conversations stop abruptly when others approach. The unspoken question hangs in the air. Who knew and who chose not to speak? Old loyalties are tested, and the cost of silence becomes a topic no one wants to confront directly. The case, once a shared tragedy, now feels like an accusation hovering over everyone. Detectives begin to apply pressure deliberately, not through threats or theatrics, but through facts presented at exactly the right moments. They let the caller see how much is already known, how little remains hidden. They reference details that can't be explained away, timelines that intersect too cleanly to be dismissed. Each conversation is a calculated step, designed to close off escape routes until only one remains: the truth. The caller reacts with visible strain. Their voice tightens, breaths shorten, pauses stretch longer than before. There are moments when it sounds like they might finally cross that line, finally say the words that have been held back for decades. But fear intervenes, pulling them back at the last second. The weight of consequences looms large, not just legal, but personal, social, irreversible. Confession is no longer just about admitting what happened. It's about dismantling an entire life constructed on denial. Behind the scenes, prosecutors are brought into the conversation. Evidence is reviewed with a different lens now, not just to understand what happened, but to determine what can be proven. The distinction matters. Some truths are undeniable yet unprovable, and the line between the two becomes the focus of intense debate. Every statement, every piece of physical evidence, every inconsistency is scrutinized for its ability to withstand challenge. The goal is no longer discovery alone. It's accountability. For the family, the days blur together. Sleep becomes elusive, interrupted by dreams that replay the past with cruel clarity. They imagine the moment they might finally hear an explanation, wonder whether it will bring relief or deepen the pain. There's an unspoken fear that even a confession won't answer the questions that matter most. Why this happened, why it took so long, why silence was allowed to persist while lives were quietly shaped by its absence. As pressure mounts, the town begins to feel smaller, more confined. Everyone is aware that something is unfolding, that the long-standing mystery is nearing a turning point. The sense of inevitability grows, a collective holding of breath. The cold case, once defined by stagnation, is now defined by momentum, and momentum, once it builds, is difficult to control. By the end of this phase, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The investigation is no longer asking if the silence will break, but when and at what cost. The past has been patient, but patience has limits. Whatever happened in 2001 is pressing forward, demanding to be acknowledged, and those who have lived comfortably in its shadow are running out of places to stand. The sixth turn of this story doesn't arrive with sirens or a headline splashed across the morning paper. It arrives the way real pressure always arrives. Quietly, deliberately, in rooms with closed doors where people speak in measured tones and slide documents across tables, as if they're passing around something fragile and dangerous. The detectives stop treating the caller like a loose thread they can tug at whenever they want, and start treating them like a fuse that might burn faster than anyone expects. The calls become fewer but more intense, each one scheduled, recorded, boxed in by facts that have been stacked neatly like bricks around a narrowing space. There is less room to breathe now, less room to hide behind uncertainty, less room to pretend that time can still protect anyone. On the surface, the town continues as if nothing has changed, grocery carts rolling over the same cracked pavement, school buses groaning at the same corners, lawn sprinklers ticking at dusk, but underneath it there's a new awareness, a low electrical hum that people feel in their bones even if they refuse to name it. Eyes linger on faces a second too long. Conversations pause when someone unfamiliar steps closer. There's a collective instinct here, a quiet sense that something is unfolding and that the final shape of it will stain more than one life. The case has become a mirror, and everyone is afraid of what they might see when it reflects back. In the station, the case file is no longer just paper. It's a living thing, open across desks, marked with fresh sticky notes, timelines redrawn in thick black ink, names circled and connected with lines that look too much like a trap being assembled. Old reports that once read like dead ends now feel like signposts that everyone walked past without understanding. A detective runs a finger down a transcript from years ago and stops at a sentence that once seemed meaningless. A throwaway comment about a vehicle, a late-night knock, a person who seemed off, and now the sentence lands like a weight. Not because it proves anything by itself, but because it's one more echo that matches the new story the caller is struggling not to tell. They start watching instead of chasing.
Qui est surveillance?
Nothing dramatic. Cars parked at distances that don't draw attention. A face in a crowd that doesn't need to be recognized to be effective. A routine logged, a pattern noted. The goal isn't to pounce, not yet. The goal is to understand how much the person at the center of this is still controlling, and how much control they're losing without realizing it. People who have carried secrets for 20 years develop habits around them. Small rituals of avoidance, subtle ways of checking who's watching, how safe the room is, whether a question is too pointed. Those habits become tells. Those tells become leverage. The caller senses the shift, even if they can't articulate it. Their tone changes again, becoming sharper at the edges, as if every word costs more than before. They ask fewer what-if questions and start asking the questions that matter, the questions that reveal exactly how deeply they understand their position. What happens if I say something and it turns out I'm wrong? What happens if I talk and someone else doesn't? What happens to my family? It's not the language of an outsider who stumbled into the story. It's the language of someone who has been standing inside it for a long time, someone who knows the architecture of the lie because they helped build it, even if they refuse to admit that out loud. The detectives respond with the calm patience of people who have learned that panic is contagious. They don't argue. They don't reassure. They do something far more unsettling. They speak plainly. They say the investigation is active. They say new evidence is being processed. They say witness statements have been revisited. They let those facts sit there like a countdown that isn't written on a clock, but is felt anyway. They mention small details, harmless on their own, devastating in combination, details the caller did not offer first. The caller goes quiet. The silence stretches. You can hear the sound of breathing on the line, uneven, as if the person is trying to hold their body still while their mind is sprinting. In the family's home, the atmosphere is different too. The phone sits in the same place, but now it feels louder even when it's not ringing. People move carefully around each other, as if one wrong word could shatter the fragile balance that's keeping them upright. They have learned not to hope, but this is forcing hope back into them anyway, the way smoke gets into a room through a crack under the door. They talk late into the night, voices low, remembering small things they once dismissed. An odd comment from a friend, a strange look from an acquaintance, a moment years ago that suddenly returns with sharp clarity. Memory, when given a new frame, becomes a weapon. Can cut through denial. It can also cut the person holding it. The investigators meet with prosecutors again, not for comfort, not for reassurance, but for strategy. They lay out what they have, what they suspect, what they can prove. They discuss thresholds, what qualifies for a warrant, what qualifies for an arrest, what could crumble under cross-examination if they move too fast. The conversation is meticulous, almost surgical. There's no room for emotion, even though everyone in the room knows emotion is the reason this matters. They talk about the confession like it's an object that must be handled with gloves, because one wrong move could smear it, contaminate it, turn it into something unusable. And then a moment arrives that doesn't feel like a climax when it happens, but later, everyone will remember it as the hinge. The caller agrees to meet, not at the station, somewhere quieter, somewhere neutral, a place where the caller thinks they can control the tone, the pacing, the escape routes. The detectives agree because control, when someone believes they have it, makes them careless. The meeting is set for a late afternoon hour, when the sun is low and the shadows on the road stretch long, when the day feels like it's already leaning toward night. The kind of hour where confession can feel less like a decision and more like surrender. The location is unremarkable, quiet enough not to draw attention, ordinary enough not to feel like a trap. The caller arrives early, sitting in their vehicle with the engine off, hands visible, shoulders tense. When the detectives approach, there's no sudden movement, no dramatic confrontation. Just two people stepping into a scene where every word will matter. The caller's face, once hidden behind a voice on a line, now has a human shape. Tired eyes, a jaw clenched too tight, skin that looks slightly gray under the light. The expression isn't rage. It isn't confidence. It's the look of someone who has been running for so long they no longer remember what it feels like to stop. The conversation begins carefully, like stepping onto thin ice. The detectives start with what they know, not what they think. They state facts calmly, one after another. They avoid accusations at first. They watch the caller's reactions, the micro-flinches, the way the eyes drop when certain names are mentioned, the way the throat tightens at specific dates. The caller interrupts once, twice, correcting a detail that wasn't actually wrong, a reflex that reveals too much. When the detective pauses, letting the correction hang in the air, the caller realizes what they've done. A flash of panic crosses their face, and for a second it looks like they might stand up, walk away, disappear again into the life they've built. But they don't. They sit back down. They swallow. They keep talking. This is how the dam begins to crack. Not with one explosive confession, but with small admissions that stack on top of each other until the weight becomes too much to hold. The caller admits they were there. They admit they knew the victim. They admit they lied about where they were that night. They say they thought it would blow over, that the investigation would lose steam, that time would soften everything. They speak in the language of rationalization, the kind of language people use when they've been talking themselves into silence for years. But underneath it you can hear something else, something raw. Fear, regret, a strange, trembling relief that comes when the burden is finally being shifted onto someone else's shoulders. The detectives don't pounce. They don't celebrate. They hold the line steady, keeping the caller talking, because what matters isn't just that the caller admits involvement. What matters is what kind. Witness, accessory, participant. The categories are cold, but the truth behind them is not. The caller circles the most crucial moment like a person walking the edge of a cliff in the dark, aware that one step further changes everything. They say there was an argument. They say someone else was there. They say they tried to stop it, or they wanted to, or they froze. The story shifts mid-sentence, contradictory, desperate, trying to land on a version of events that preserves some piece of the self. The detectives let the contradictions surface. They do not fix them for the caller. They know the truth has a way of asserting itself when the lie runs out of oxygen. A name slips out, half-spoken, then swallowed, then spoken again, clearer this time because once the word exists in the air, it cannot be unheard. It's a local name, a name that belongs to this place, to this community, to the web of relationships that made the crime possible. The caller flinches after saying it, as if expecting a blow. The detectives remain still. They ask follow-up questions, steady and precise. Where? When? What did they do? What did you do? The caller's hands tremble, fingers pressing into their own palms. They look down at the ground as if the dirt might offer a hiding place. When the meeting ends, nothing feels resolved. There is no cinematic closure. There is only the heavy certainty that the story is finally taking shape, and that shape is going to hurt. The detectives return to the station with hours of recorded audio and a mind full of details that must be checked, verified, anchored to physical evidence. The prosecutor is called. The next steps are outlined with crisp efficiency. Warrants, interviews, a careful move toward a person who has lived quietly for years, perhaps believing the past had rotted enough to be harmless. And somewhere across town, the family receives another call, another request to come in, another careful voice saying there is new information. They hang up and stand in the kitchen, staring at each other, because they can feel it now, the shift in the air, the sense that the long night of not knowing is nearing a dawn that might not be gentle. The cold case is cracking, yes, but cracks can cut, and the closer the truth comes, the more everyone involved realizes the same terrifying thing. Once you open the door to what happened in 2001, you don't get to decide what walks out. The next 48 hours move like a machine waking up, gears clicking into place one by one, quiet at first, then louder, unstoppable, because once a case like this shifts from possibility to action, there is no room left for hesitation. Detectives sit with the recording from that meeting and listen to it again and again, not for drama, not for satisfaction, but for precision, for the exact phrasing, the slips, the moments the caller tried to reshape a memory mid-sentence and failed. They mark timestamps. They write down every name, every location, every half-finished thought. They compare it to the old file, to photographs, to notes written by hands that retired long ago. The past is suddenly layered over the present like a transparent map, and when the lines match, the room goes still in that way that only happens when professionals realize they're looking at something real. The warrants are drafted carefully, language sharpened to a point, because the court doesn't care about gut feelings or decades of community rumor. It cares about probable cause, about what can be articulated, what can be supported, what can be defended. Every sentence is a bridge that has to hold weight. The confession, still imperfect, still shifting, becomes the spark, but it can't be the only fuel. Detectives build the rest. Witness statements that align now in new ways, inconsistencies that were overlooked before, old timelines revised with new anchors, forensic re-examinations that add quiet support without needing to shout. When the judge signs, it's done without ceremony. Ink on paper, a nod, the kind of mundane action that can upend an entire town. And then the phone call to the family comes, not at midnight this time, but in the harsh, ordinary light of day. They're asked to come in again. It's framed gently, but they hear the difference. The voice on the other end doesn't sound like someone delivering another incremental update. It sounds like someone preparing them for impact. The family arrives with the same guarded posture they've worn for years, but beneath it there's a tremor now, an awareness that whatever they're about to hear may finally have weight. In the station, they sit across from familiar faces and unfamiliar files. They listen. They grip each other's hands under the table. And when a detective says, carefully, that there is now a person of interest being actively pursued, the family's breathing changes. The air in the room shifts. A 20-year sentence ends and a new one begins. News doesn't officially break. Not yet. But towns like this don't need official announcements. Movement is enough. A detective's car parked in an unusual place. A conversation cut short in a diner. The sight of someone from the sheriff's office stepping into a building they haven't touched in years. Information spreads in fragments, and the fragments gather into a shape that everyone recognizes even before they can name it. Something is happening. The cold case isn't just a story anymore. It's a living threat. The name the caller gave, local, ordinary, easy to recognize, becomes the gravity point. Detectives don't say it out loud in public, but the town does what towns do. People connect dots. They remember old fights, old alliances, old quiet moments that suddenly look suspicious when reinterpreted through this new lens. One person claims they always knew. Another swears it's impossible. Someone else says, in a trembling whisper, that they once saw that person near the victim's place late at night and didn't think anything of it because why would they? Why would anyone? That's the terrifying part. The answer, if it's really this close, was never hidden behind complexity. It was hidden behind familiarity. The first search happens in the early morning, when the world is half asleep and the air is cold enough to make breath visible. The target property sits on a quiet street that has seen too many years of normal life to imagine it might be connected to something this dark. Officers approach calmly, respectfully, as if this were any other procedure, but everyone's senses are sharp, tuned to small movements, small sounds. A door opens. A face appears, surprised but not shocked. The expression of someone who doesn't yet understand what's coming. Papers are presented. Authority is asserted. The house that has held its own history for years is entered and examined. Drawers opened, boxes lifted, floors searched for what might remain after so much time. And the strangest part is how ordinary it all looks. A living room, kitchen, family photos, clothes folded, a life. The juxtaposition is sickening because it forces the question, what kind of person lives an entire life on top of a buried truth? Detectives aren't looking for a smoking gun. They're looking for connections, for corroboration, for the kind of detail that proves the confession wasn't a hallucination or a manipulation. They collect documents. They photograph items. They seize devices. They take notes that are brutally neutral because neutrality is how you keep from being pulled under by the weight of what you're holding. Somewhere in that home, somewhere in its corners and quiet spaces, the past might still be present. They need it to speak. The person of interest is brought in for questioning. Not handcuffed yet, not arrested, just invited, escorted, guided into a room where the walls are plain and time is measured in questions. The initial posture is calm, almost polite, the kind of calm that reads as innocence to some, arrogance to others. They answer basic questions easily. Where were you in 2001? What was your relationship to the victim? When was the last time you saw them? Each answer is delivered with practiced simplicity, as if it's been rehearsed in the mind for years, polished and ready. But detectives are listening for what isn't said, for what is avoided, for the way certain dates cause the throat to tighten and the eyes to blink too quickly. Then the pressure starts, not with accusations, but with the slow introduction of facts the person didn't expect. Not everything, not yet. Just enough to crack certainty. A timeline that places them near the victim's home at a time they claim to be elsewhere. A witness statement that contradicts a detail they offered confidently. The subtle revelation that the investigation has more than it used to. The person of interest shifts in the chair. A foot taps once, then stops. The calm begins to fray at the edges. Outside that room, detectives coordinate like chess players. They know the person of interest might fold under pressure, might lash out, might try to pivot blame elsewhere. They also know the caller is out there, still alive, still listening to the news of movement, still feeling the walls close in. The caller was the first crack in the dam, but cracks spread unpredictably. If the caller senses betrayal, they might shut down. If the person of interest senses danger, they might try to intimidate, to silence, to scramble the story before it hardens. Every hour matters now in ways it didn't for decades. The caller is contacted again, gently but firmly, told that the investigation is moving, that what they said is being acted upon. The caller's reaction is immediate. The voice on the line suddenly strained, furious, terrified, relief tangled with regret. They ask what was found. They ask if the person of interest knows. They ask if their name will come out. These aren't questions asked by someone who stumbled into a nightmare. These are questions asked by someone who has been living inside one and has finally lost control of the exit. Detectives hold the line, reminding the caller that cooperation matters, that consistency matters, that the truth is the only thing left that can offer any kind of protection. The caller's voice breaks. There's a pause, long enough that the sound of the world creeps into the line. Traffic far away, a dog barking, something ordinary that feels obscene against the gravity of the moment. Then the caller starts talking again. Faster now, words tumbling out as if the dam inside them is finally giving way. They clarify details they avoided before. They place the person of interest not just in the orbit of the victim, but inside the critical window of time, inside the gap the detectives have been circling. They admit to actions that feel smaller than the central act but are no less damning. Decisions made after, choices that protected someone else, choices that ensured the case became cold. When the family hears that there has been a breakthrough, that an interview is underway, that pieces are aligning, it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like standing at the edge of a cliff with the wind pushing at your back. They've imagined this moment for so long, but imagination never includes the cost. The cost is seeing the name of the victim on official paperwork again. The cost is hearing strangers speak about someone they loved as a subject in an investigation. The cost is knowing that even if the truth comes out, it won't rewind time, it won't restore what was stolen, it will only explain the shape of the wound. As the day stretches on, the town tightens around itself. People check their phones more often. They glance at the news, at social media, at each other. There's an appetite for information and an equal fear of it, because everyone knows what happens when a long-standing mystery finally breaks. It doesn't just punish the guilty, it humiliates the comfortable. It exposes the blind spots that kept everyone safe in their own minds. It forces the community to admit that evil doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it lives next door. Sometimes it smiles at you at the grocery store. Sometimes it sits in the same bleachers at the same football games, year after year, while a family waits for answers that are sitting in plain sight. By evening, the questioning of the person of interest has changed tone. The answers are no longer smooth. There are contradictions now, small at first, then sharper. A denial that comes too quickly. A correction that isn't necessary. A sudden insistence on details that weren't asked. The detective across the table remains calm, patient, relentless. They know that truth under pressure doesn't always appear as confession. Sometimes it appears as collapse. The person of interest leans back, eyes flicking to the door as if measuring distance. The detective slides a paper across the table, just a portion of what they have, just enough to show the net tightening, and watches the face change in real time. And in that moment, with the room humming in tense silence, a realization lands like a hammer. The case that was once cold is now hot enough to burn everyone it touches, and the question isn't whether the truth will come out anymore. It's how violent the struggle will be before it does, because people who have protected a secret for 20 years don't just surrender it. They fight, they bargain, they lie harder. And if there is one thing this town is about to learn, it's that the final act of a cold case isn't clean. It's messy, and it spreads, and it leaves behind a new kind of silence when it's over. One filled not with questions, but with the echoes of answers no one wanted to hear. Night falls with the kind of quiet that feels staged, as if the town is holding its breath on purpose, waiting for the next headline to write itself. Streetlights buzz. Porch screens glow blue with television light. Somewhere a train horn moans and fades, and for a second it sounds like the past calling out across 2 decades, asking if anyone is finally listening. In the interview room, the person of interest sits under fluorescent light that never flatters anyone. But this isn't about comfort. It's about endurance. The detective across the table doesn't rush. They've learned that time can be used as a tool, and tonight, time is being sharpened into a blade. The person of interest's confidence is still there, but it has changed shape. It's no longer smooth and casual. It's rigid, defensive, like armor that's starting to pinch. Their words come faster than before, as if speed can outrun scrutiny. They insist on the same phrases. They repeat the same denials. They anchor their story to a version of 2001 that sounds too clean, too rehearsed, the way a speech sounds when it's been practiced in the shower for years. And then the detective does something simple, almost gentle. They stop asking questions for a moment and let the silence expand. The person of interest fills it, because people who are nervous fear silence more than they fear accusations. They talk. They over-explain. They offer details no one requested, and in that extra fabric, seams begin to show. A knock interrupts, soft but deliberate. A second detective steps in, not with drama, but with a folder held loosely, as if it's nothing. They hand it over without a word. The first detective opens it slowly, reads for a beat, then looks up. The person of interest watches that look like it's a weather change, like it signals something dangerous on the horizon. The detective doesn't reveal the entire content. They don't need to. They say one sentence, a small one, a sentence designed to destabilize. There's been a development that contradicts your timeline. The person of interest's eyes narrow. They ask what development. The detective doesn't answer directly. They just repeat. It contradicts your timeline. This is how pressure works when it's done right. It doesn't slam. It leans. It makes someone feel the walls changing shape around them. The person of interest shifts, crosses their arms, then uncrosses them, as if their own body can't decide what posture looks innocent anymore. They ask if they're under arrest. The detective says not at this moment. The person of interest asks if they can leave. The detective says you're free to end the interview. The person of interest hesitates because leaving can look like guilt, but staying can be worse. The tension hangs in that pause, stretched thin, vibrating. Outside that room, phones buzz in offices and kitchens across town. Not official announcements, not press releases, just the sound of human curiosity colliding with fear. A cousin texts a cousin. A friend calls a friend. Someone's brother-in-law says he saw deputies at that house on that street. Someone's coworker says they heard the old case is moving. The story spreads with a new kind of speed, the kind that only appears when a community realizes it might finally be forced to face its own reflection. People who never wanted to talk about 2001 now can't stop. People who built their identity on being from a quiet town suddenly feel like they live in a place with teeth. The family hears about movement before they hear the details. It comes through a call from a detective, then through the buzzing rumor network, then through their own instincts, the ones sharpened by years of false alarms. They sit at their kitchen table like they have so many nights before, but everything feels louder now. The refrigerator hum, the clock ticking, the distant traffic. They are waiting for a truth that has been dangling in front of them for decades. And now that it's close, it feels almost cruel. Because the closer you get, the more you realize how many forms the truth can take. And not all of them are clean, not all of them are complete. The caller, the one who broke the silence in the first place, becomes the most unstable element in the entire story. They are contacted again, asked to clarify, to go on the record, to formalize what they've said. Detectives need structure now. They need statements that can be used. The caller's voice is different tonight. It's sharper, more brittle, like glass that's been heated and is starting to crack. They say they didn't mean to start all this. They say they thought they could just tell enough to get it off their chest without setting the entire machine in motion. They ask if it's too late to stop. The detective on the line doesn't flinch. The detective says the case didn't stop in 2001. It just waited. And the caller, after a long pause, says something that changes the temperature in the room. I think they know I talked. That sentence lands like a dropped weight. Because now the case isn't only about the past. It's about the present. It's about what happens when secrets are threatened. People who have lived comfortably in silence don't always react with surrender. Sometimes they react with control. Sometimes they reach for old instincts that worked before. Detectives listen carefully as the caller describes a subtle shift. An unusual drive-by. A call from an unknown number. A conversation that felt like a warning without ever saying the word. The caller is scared. Not the abstract fear of consequences someday. The immediate fear of consequences now. And then, like the town itself is trying to prove that nothing is ever simple, the person of interest brings up a lawyer. It happens abruptly. Mid-interview, after a question that lands too close to the center, the person of interest says they want legal counsel. The detective nods, calm as stone. The interview is paused. The room empties. The person of interest sits alone for a moment, staring at the table, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on nothing. And in that silence, you can almost hear the years stretching backward. You can almost hear the old choices whispering. Because calling a lawyer is a right, but in a town starved for answers, it sounds like a verdict. The rumor network takes it and turns it into wildfire. They lawyered up. They're guilty. They're running. They're finished. Police don't move based on rumors, but rumors create pressure of their own. The department keeps everything sealed as much as they can, but the story seeps anyway. By dawn, there are already people sitting in their trucks outside the station, pretending to scroll their phones while actually watching the doors. Local reporters start calling. National outlets sniff around the edges because a 20-year-old missing person case with a sudden confession is the kind of story that sells itself. The sheriff's office declines comment. Silence again, but this time it's strategic, not helpless. Another search is scheduled, this time more targeted, more intense. Detectives return to locations named by the caller, places that were vague before and now are being pinned down with painful specificity. A stretch of land outside town. An abandoned structure that has been standing empty since before anyone can remember. A rural road where cell service drops and the sky feels too big. They don't announce it. They don't bring a parade of vehicles. They go quietly because quiet is how you keep control. But word gets out anyway because in a small town, secrecy is a myth. Someone sees the convoy. Someone sees the uniforms. Someone recognizes the equipment. And suddenly, the town's imagination fills in the blanks. The family is told only what they need to know, but even that is enough to make their knees feel weak. They are told investigators are following up on new information that may relate to where the victim went. The word where hangs in the air like a ghost. Where implies a place, a final place, a possibility of answers that is both comforting and terrifying. The family tries to prepare themselves, but there is no preparing for this. You can't practice what it feels like to be dragged back into the worst day of your life while the rest of the world watches. At the search site, the air is cold and sharp. The land looks ordinary. Brush, dirt, a few trees. Nothing about it screams tragedy. That's part of the horror of it. The most devastating truths often hide in places that look like nothing. Investigators move methodically, marking areas, coordinating quietly, documenting every step so it can withstand scrutiny later. They find things that mean nothing, then things that might mean something, then, finally, something that makes everyone stop at once. Not a body, not a dramatic discovery. Something smaller, something ambiguous, something that could be dismissed by anyone who doesn't understand context. A personal item that doesn't belong there, an object that pulls the past into the present with a sudden, sickening force. They bag it. They photograph it. They treat it like it's fragile because it is. Fragile evidence, fragile hope, fragile sanity. And when the family is informed that an item has been recovered that may be connected to the case, the reaction isn't celebration. It's collapse. A hand over the mouth. A chair pulled back too quickly. Tears that come without warning. Because if it's real, it means the disappearance wasn't just a blank space anymore. It had a path. It had an endpoint. It had a shape that can finally be named. Meanwhile, the caller begins to unravel. After hearing that investigators have moved on the person of interest, after sensing what they believe is retaliation, the caller starts to backpedal. They say they were confused. They say they were pressured. They say maybe they got details wrong. This is the moment detectives fear most. The moment a confession tries to evaporate back into uncertainty. They respond immediately, not with anger, but with structure. They remind the caller of what they said. They remind them of what was recorded. They remind them that retracting doesn't erase the truth. It only adds another layer of guilt. The caller sobs. The line goes quiet. The detective waits. And then, through broken breaths, the caller says the sentence that exposes the real core of the secret. I didn't do the worst part, but I helped make sure nobody found out who did. That admission changes everything. Because now the case isn't only about a single act in 2001. It's about what followed. It's about decisions made in the aftermath. Lies told, evidence hidden, stories aligned, silence maintained. It's about a conspiracy of ordinary fear and selfish protection that kept a family suspended in grief for 20 years. The caller names the person of interest again, more clearly, more firmly, and adds another name. Someone else, someone the community would recognize, someone who has lived quietly in plain sight, someone whose involvement would shake the town all over again. When detectives hang up, the station feels like a sealed room filled with combustible air. Because names are ammunition, and once they're spoken, they can't be unspoken. Investigators know the next steps will be bigger, louder, harder to contain. Arrests might be coming. Charges might be coming. But certainty still isn't guaranteed, because confession without full corroboration is dangerous. And in a case this old, every gap is an opening for doubt. Outside, morning breaks over Texas like it always does. Bright and indifferent. People drive to work. Kids get on buses. Life pretends it is normal. But beneath the ordinary, the town is changing shape. A cold case that once felt like a permanent scar is now splitting open, raw again, and everyone can feel it. Because now it's no longer just about what happened. It's about who lived beside the truth, who protected it, who benefited from it, and what will happen when the final layer of silence peels away, and whatever has been hiding underneath finally steps into the light. By the time the sun lifts itself over the flat Texas horizon again, the story has already outrun the people trying to contain it, because that's what happens when a cold case wakes up after 2 decades. Every quiet hallway becomes an echo chamber. Every routine becomes suspicious. Every name becomes a headline before anyone has even printed it. The sheriff's office is still saying no comment, the station is still pretending it's just another week of paperwork and patrols, but inside, the air is tight, compressed, a sealed room full of pressure, because now there are 2 names on the table, and the second name is the kind that makes you stop breathing for a second, the kind that makes detectives look at each other without speaking, because everyone understands what it means when a secret doesn't belong to one person, when it belongs to a small network that survived by holding the same lie in their mouths for 20 years. The item recovered from the search site is sent away immediately, logged and sealed, treated like it could shatter if handled too roughly. Chain of custody, photographs, evidence tags, every step deliberate, because the case is no longer just a missing person mystery, it's a legal minefield, and one misstep could hand the defense a weapon sharp enough to cut the whole thing open. In a corner office, a prosecutor reads the draft of an affidavit and marks it up with a pen that moves fast, underlining, circling, rewriting, because words matter now, not poetic words, not dramatic words, but the cold language of probable cause, the kind of language that can turn a whisper into a warrant. The caller is brought into the station for a formal statement, and the moment the door closes behind them, the room feels smaller. No phone line now, no distance, just a person sitting under a buzzing light, hands clasped too tightly, eyes darting like they're expecting someone to burst in and drag them out. They ask for water. They can't drink it when it comes. They keep wiping their palms on their jeans. Detectives don't start with threats. They start with the timeline, with dates, with a map spread on the table, and when the caller sees familiar lines and locations, the face changes, first confusion, then fear, then something like surrender. They are told the conversation is recorded. They are reminded that lies now will make everything worse. They are asked one more time to tell the truth. And when the caller begins, the words don't come as a cinematic confession, not a neat monologue with a clear beginning and end, but as fragments that break and reform, as a person trying to speak through years of denial, through the protective crust they built around their own guilt. They talk about that night in 2001 like it's still happening, like they can still smell the heat in the air, still hear the distant traffic, still feel their heart hammering against their ribs. They say they were called to come over. They say they didn't know what they were walking into. They say they arrived and saw the victim upset, voices raised, a confrontation that felt bigger than it should have been. They avoid certain words, flinch away from details, but the shape of the story is unmistakable. The victim didn't vanish into the night by accident. The victim was taken out of their life by human hands and human choices, and the caller, whatever their role, stood close enough to become part of it. The detectives keep them anchored. Who was there? What time? What did you see? What did you do? The caller names the person of interest again, and then names the second person again, and this time the name lands heavier because it belongs to someone with a clean public face, someone people trust, someone who has walked into church and school events and community meetings without anyone ever seeing the shadow behind them. The caller says that after it happened, after panic and shock and a kind of horrible quiet settled over the scene, the others didn't act like people who had just witnessed disaster. They acted like people who had plans, like people who had already rehearsed what they would do if something went too far. The caller says they were told to help. The caller says they did help. Not the act itself, they insist, not the worst part, but the covering, the cleaning, the moving, the erasing. The caller's voice breaks on the word erasing, because it's the word that sums up the last 20 years. Erase the noise, erase the trail, erase the story, erase the victim's last hours from the world so completely that even memory would lose its grip. Outside the station, the rumor network doesn't wait for confirmation. A friend of a friend sees an unmarked car outside a certain house. A neighbor sees a deputy at a mailbox. Someone claims they heard the second name on a scanner, even though the scanner chatter is locked down tighter than ever. The town turns into a listening ear, pressed against walls, trying to catch the sound of justice moving. People pretend they aren't watching while watching anyway. The local diner feels louder, not because anyone is yelling, but because silence is harder to hold when everyone is thinking the same thing. If it's really them, if it's really those names, what does that say about all of us? The family is asked to come in again, and this time they aren't seated with gentle distance and careful phrasing. This time they are placed in a small room with tissues on the table, and the detective speaking to them looks like they haven't slept. The family sees it immediately, the exhaustion, the strain of carrying the truth and trying not to drop it. They are told there has been a significant development. They are told there is now an official cooperating witness, that a formal statement has been taken, that the investigation is now focused on specific individuals. The family hears the words and feels their body react before the mind can catch up. Nausea, tremor, a sudden rush of heat behind the eyes. One of them asks the question that has been sitting in their throat for 2 decades. Where? The detective doesn't answer directly. Not yet. The detective says they are following up on location information. The detective says they are being careful. The detective says they will not speculate. But the family hears what is not said, and what is not said is louder than anything else. There may be a place. There may be a final place. There may be something that can be found, something that can end the torture of not knowing what happened after the door closed, after the night swallowed the last trace. The family leaves the station with legs that feel unfamiliar, like they're walking through a world that has shifted a few inches to the side. That afternoon, the first arrest doesn't happen with a crowd or a shout. It happens with quiet professionalism, a knock at a door, a calm request to step outside, hands placed behind a back. The person of interest, first named, doesn't fight. They look stunned, as if they truly believe time had sealed them inside safety. A neighbor stands on a porch, frozen. Someone's phone lifts, recording without thinking. A patrol car door opens and closes with a sound that feels like punctuation. The moment is gone in minutes, but the ripple it creates spreads instantly. The first name is now more than rumor. It is procedure. It is real. The second person, the one with the clean public face, reacts differently. Detectives learn quickly that they have already called an attorney, already begun building their defense before anyone even touched their door. When officers arrive, the second person meets them on the porch, controlled, polite, almost offended. They ask what this is about. They ask if they're being detained. They ask if they're free to go back inside. The posture is practiced, the language careful, and it sends a chill through investigators because innocence doesn't always sound like this, and guilt doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes guilt looks like calm because calm is control, and control is what kept this case cold for 20 years. Back at the station, the first person of interest is placed in an interview room, and what happens there is not a dramatic explosion, not a sudden collapse, but a slow war of words. The suspect denies. They minimize. They attack the caller's credibility. They suggest the caller is trying to save themselves. They suggest the detectives are desperate to close an old file. They suggest anything that might turn the story into fog again. Detectives counter with the timeline, with witness statements, with the item recovered from the search site, with details the suspect didn't expect to hear out loud. The suspect's eyes flicker at certain moments, tiny betrayals of recognition. The suspect asks what the item was. The detective says, "We're not here to educate you." The suspect swallows hard. The room feels like a storm cloud holding itself together. Meanwhile, the caller is moved to another room, kept separate, protected, because the moment you become a cooperating witness in a case like this, you become a target not necessarily for violence, but for intimidation, for pressure, for the quiet threats that can ruin a life without leaving bruises. The caller asks if people know they talked. The detective says not officially. The caller laughs once, bitter, because in a small town nothing stays unofficial for long. The caller says the second person is going to deny everything. The caller says the second person will twist the story until the town forgets again. The detective looks at the caller and says the town already remembers. The caller looks away like the words hurt. As evening approaches, a press leak hits the outskirts of the internet, and suddenly the story has a shape visible beyond the county line. Texas 2001 cold case cracked. It says, and the phrase lands like a slap because it's exactly what the town has been whispering. Family stunned by sudden confession. It says, And that part is too true to read without shaking. Cameras appear outside the station. A reporter stands near the entrance, speaking into a microphone, trying to sound calm while the story behind them grows teeth. The sheriff's office issues a short statement, a few lines that say there is an ongoing investigation and no further details can be released. No names, no charges. But it doesn't matter. The machine of public attention is already moving. That night, the family sits again at their kitchen table, but the table feels different because now the outside world is leaning in. There are messages from relatives they haven't heard from in years. There are calls they don't answer. There are headlines that feel like they belong to strangers, not to their own grief. They look at a photograph of the victim, smiling, alive, untouched by the darkness that would come, and the heartbreak is almost physical because you can't reconcile the face in the photo with the word evidence, with the word arrest, with the idea that people they might have known, people they might have greeted, carried the truth while the family carried the pain. And somewhere across town, the second person sits behind closed curtains, speaking quietly into a phone, building a strategy, tightening control, preparing to fight not just for freedom but for reputation. Because in a town like this, reputation is a second life, and losing it can feel like death even if you walk away from court. Detectives know the fight is coming. They also know something else, something more dangerous than any legal battle. If there really is a location, if there really is a place where the victim's story ends, then the next search could deliver the one thing that turns suspicion into certainty. They prepare the teams. They prep the warrants. They coordinate with specialists. The night feels too long, stretched tight like a wire. Because the truth is close now. Close enough to smell. Close enough to make people do desperate things. And as the town drifts into uneasy sleep, one thought pulses through every room connected to this case like a heartbeat. If the next search finds what everyone fears it will find, then tomorrow won't just be another day in Texas. It will be the day the last 20 years finally crash into the present, and nothing, not a lawyer, not a denial, not a carefully built life will be able to hold the past back anymore. The next morning doesn't start with sunlight, it starts with motion. Quiet, coordinated motion that looks ordinary to anyone passing by but feels like a countdown to everyone who knows what's inside the sealed boxes, the signed warrants, the taped interviews. Coffee goes cold on desks. Radios crackle in low tones. Names are spoken in clipped sentences and then not spoken at all because now the case is no longer just a story about 2001. It's a story about what happens when a town realizes the monster didn't come from the highway, it came from the neighborhood, and it sat still for years while people looked right through it. A search team gathers before dawn, not because darkness is dramatic, but because darkness is quiet, and quiet is control. There are fewer vehicles than the rumor mill would imagine, fewer lights, fewer voices. Every step is documented. Every instruction is repeated twice. The land they return to isn't the same land as before. Not exactly. The caller's formal statement has tightened the map, turned vague directions into a specific line of trees, a specific bend in the road, a specific patch of ground that looks no different than any other patch until you know what you're looking for. Out here, the sky feels too wide, and the silence feels like it has teeth. The detectives on scene don't talk about hope. Hope is not part of the protocol. They talk about grids, markers, evidence preservation, chain of custody. They talk about what they can prove. Because in a case like this, certainty is a product you manufacture carefully, and the raw material is found in the smallest things. A trace, an object, a disturbance in the earth that doesn't belong. And the danger is always the same. Your mind wants to see what you fear you'll find, so you have to force your eyes to stay honest. They begin methodically, working the area the way you work an old wound. Slowly, carefully, aware that the moment you go too fast you destroy what you were trying to save. A technician calls out coordinates. Flags go down in the dirt. Another person photographs. Another writes. The steps are almost ritual, a choreography built for the worst days. The kind of choreography that keeps you from falling apart when the truth is too heavy to hold in your bare hands. Back at the station, the first arrested suspect sits behind a closed door, separated from the noise of cameras outside and the rumors outside those cameras. They have been booked now. Fingerprints taken. Paperwork done. A schedule established for hearings and legal procedure, because justice in the real world is not a single moment. It's a series of steps that can be slow enough to feel like torture. The The suspect's lawyer arrives and speaks in a voice that is all smooth edges and careful boundaries, asking what evidence exists, suggesting the caller is unreliable, suggesting law enforcement is chasing a headline. The detectives listen and say little because they understand something the lawyer is banking on. If the public thinks this is just another false alarm, the pressure shifts. If the public thinks the confession is weak, the case gets softer. Doubt is a weapon, and everyone in this building knows how it's used. The second suspect, clean image, controlled demeanor, has not been arrested yet. Not because they're safe, not because the case isn't reaching for them, but because timing matters and proof matters. They've been interviewed through counsel. They've issued a statement through a lawyer that sounds like indignation wrapped in civility. They deny involvement. They deny knowledge. They imply they are being dragged into a tragedy for the convenience of a narrative. Their words travel fast, bouncing across local news and social feeds, and the town absorbs them the way a dry field absorbs a spark. Some people believe it instantly, because believing it is easier than admitting you've been sharing air with something ugly for years. Others hear the denial and feel the chill of recognition. That's not innocence, that's strategy. The family is told about the new search in terms that are careful, restrained, almost painfully gentle. They are not offered details that can't be confirmed. They are told only that investigators are following up on location information provided by a cooperating witness. The family hears location and tries to keep their bodies from reacting, but it's impossible. Their hands shake. Their mouths go dry. Their minds race ahead and then slam into a wall, because racing ahead is how you break yourself. They have survived 2 decades by living one day at a time. Now the next day is trying to carry the weight of 20 years. Outside the sheriff's office, reporters cluster like moths around a porch light. They talk into cameras about breakthroughs and arrests. And they use the phrase cold case cracked because it sounds like a satisfying ending. But inside the station, no one is celebrating. Cracked is not solved. Cracked is not closure. Cracked is what happens right before something shatters, and shattering can cut everyone standing too close. In the search field, the rhythm changes subtly when a handler signals something, when someone raises a hand, when voices drop even lower. A small circle forms. People adjust their posture not to be dramatic, but because a human mind recognizes gravity even before it can name it. They slow down further. They document more. The lead investigator makes a call back to the command center. Their voice is controlled, but there is a shift in it that people recognize later when they replay the day in their heads. It's the shift from searching to finding. What they recover isn't broadcast on loudspeakers. It isn't paraded. It is handled with respect and caution and that kind of quiet solemnity that says, without words, that this isn't just evidence. It's a life that had a name, a laugh, a place at a table. The team secures the area. They expand the search. They collect what can be collected without destroying context. The work is slow, almost unbearably so, but it has to be. Because if this is what it looks like, if the location is real, then everything changes, and it changes in ways that are both devastating and clarifying. The call to the family comes later, not from a reporter, not from a rumor, but from an investigator who chooses the words carefully because they know these words will echo for the rest of the family's lives. They say a recovery has been made. They say it will take time to confirm. They say they won't speculate. They say they will keep the family informed every step of the way. The family hears recovery and feels the room tilt. Someone sits down hard. Someone covers their face. Someone makes a sound that isn't quite crying and isn't quite speaking. Because for 20 years, the absence was its own kind of torture, and now the possibility of an endpoint, any endpoint, arrives like a storm. The town reacts instantly, even without details. People see the vehicles returning from the rural road. They see the way officers' faces look when they come back from a day like this. The chatter online intensifies, shifting from curiosity to dread. Some people post prayers. Others post accusations. Old arguments reignite. The case becomes a battleground between those who want truth and those who want quiet, and the loudest voices are not always the most informed. In the middle of it, the family tries to breathe, tries to eat, tries to sleep, and fails at all three. The first suspect is informed, through the wall of legal procedure, that a significant development has occurred. The response is small and telling. A question asked too quickly, a request for details that shouldn't matter if you're truly uninvolved. The suspect's lawyer objects. The suspect sits back, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the floor. In a case like this, you don't always get a confession when the net tightens. Sometimes you get something else. A shift in posture, a sudden obsession with what the police found, a visible calculation in a face that realizes the past is no longer abstract. The caller, meanwhile, is breaking under the strain of being the first domino. They are relocated temporarily, kept away from familiar places, because the moment two names become public suspicion, the person who spoke them becomes radioactive. The caller complains that they're being punished for telling the truth. They say they never wanted this. They say they can't breathe. Detectives listen, and one of them says something quietly, not cruel, not comforting, just real. You lived with it for 20 years. Now we all have to live with it long enough to finish this. The second suspect makes a move that afternoon, and it's subtle enough to look like nothing if you don't understand the game. Their attorney requests records, files, discovery. They begin to frame the caller as unstable, to frame the first suspect as the sole actor, to frame themselves as collateral damage. The story they build is careful, polished, designed for public consumption as much as for court. It's the kind of strategy that works when evidence is thin and time is long. But time is no longer their ally now. The search site has shifted the ground. By evening, lab technicians have taken custody of what was recovered. Tests begin. Paperwork stacks. Specialists speak in controlled tones about timelines for analysis and confirmation. Detectives hate waiting, but waiting is part of this, and waiting is dangerous because while science moves at its own pace, people panic at theirs. Witnesses get scared. Suspects get strategic. The town gets loud. The family gets pulled apart by the weight of knowing something has been found but not being allowed to name it yet. Late that night, as the station's lights burn in windows that should have gone dark hours ago, a detective listens to the caller's recorded statement again and stops at a phrase that didn't stand out before. A detail about the aftermath. A mention of something that was moved, something that was kept, something that could still exist in someone's possession as a souvenir of silence. The detective circles it in red ink. Another warrant begins to take shape. And in a quiet house somewhere in town, the second suspect sits with their phone on the table, screen dark, hands folded, listening to the silence between notifications like it's telling them how much time they have left. Because the case is no longer a rumor, no longer a story that can be laughed off, no longer a file that can be outlasted. It has a location now. It has a trail. It has gravity. The cold case is cracked, yes, but the crack is widening, and everyone can feel the edge of what's coming. The lab results are pending. The next warrant is being written. The town is awake in the dark, scrolling, whispering, praying, accusing. And somewhere inside the system, the oldest question is finally starting to change shape, turning from what happened into something far more dangerous for the people who kept it hidden. How much of it can we prove, and who else is about to fall when the truth finally lands? The last hours of night bleed into morning like ink in water, and the town wakes up to a new kind of silence, the kind that doesn't feel peaceful, the kind that feels like a courtroom before the verdict. Because now the story isn't just whisper and rumor, it's procedure, it's paper, it's sealed evidence bags moving from hand to hand, it's phones lighting up with messages nobody knows how to answer. It's a community realizing that once a secret starts to fall apart, it doesn't fall apart neatly. It breaks in jagged pieces, and every piece cuts someone. Inside the station, the air smells like stale coffee and printer ink, like people who haven't slept, like a building that has been holding its breath for days. Detectives move with that quiet efficiency that looks calm from the outside but is powered by a storm underneath. They're doing two things at once now, always two things. Building the case that can stand up in court, and preventing the case from being ripped apart by fear before it ever reaches a judge. They've seen it before, the way witnesses suddenly forget, the way stories change when lawyers get involved, the way a town's loyalty can bend toward comfort instead of truth. They can feel the forces lining up against them, time, reputation, denial, and they can feel the one force finally lining up with them too. Momentum. The lab work doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives as an email, as a phone call, as a technician's voice that stays professional even when the content carries the weight of a life. There are confirmations and there are cautions, language that refuses to overpromise, because science doesn't care about narrative arcs. The confirmation is enough to shift the investigation into a new gear, enough to turn suspicion into something heavier, but it isn't the kind of certainty people imagine when they say closure. It's the kind of certainty that forces more questions out into the open, questions that had been hidden under the simpler, more comforting unknown. Not just what happened, but who decided, who helped, who benefited, who stayed quiet while a family broke slowly over 20 years. The detective assigned to the caller sits with them again, not in a friendly way, not in an enemy way, but in the way a person sits with a live wire, careful with every movement. The caller looks smaller now, shrunken by the consequence of having spoken. They keep asking if they're safe, and the detective keeps answering in careful, honest phrases, because safe is a complicated word in a town where everyone knows everyone, in a case where blame spreads like smoke. The caller says they can't undo it. The detective says no. The caller says people will hate them. The detective says maybe. The caller's eyes fill, and they finally say the sentence they've avoided for 20 years. The one that makes their whole body tremble. They should have stopped it. Not later. Not after. Not by calling now. They should have stopped it then. The detective doesn't offer forgiveness. The detective doesn't offer punishment. The detective offers a question. Then tell us everything. Every detail. Every lie. Every person who touched this. The caller closes their eyes and nods like they're stepping off a ledge. Names come again, but now they come with structure, with context, with motives that feel ugly in their ordinariness. Jealousy. Money.
Pride.
Fear. The caller doesn't present a grand evil plan. They describe a chain of moments, a room too hot, tempers too high, voices that crossed a line and then couldn't step back. They describe the panic afterward, the way people's faces changed when they realized what they'd done. The way someone started giving instructions like they'd been waiting for a reason to take control. And the caller describes their own role in the aftermath with a kind of shame that makes the words scrape on the way out. Messages deleted, stories aligned, someone told to stay quiet, a phone call made to the right person, a lie offered to the right deputy, small actions that felt survivable in the moment and became unforgivable over decades. The case against the first suspect hardens quickly. An arrest is one thing. A charge that can hold is another. Investigators assemble the scaffolding. The caller's statement, the corroborating witness who remembers a specific vehicle at a specific time, the discrepancy in the suspect's old alibi that only becomes obvious when you line it up with the new timeline, the physical item recovered that ties the story to a place instead of letting it float in rumor. When the prosecutor lays it out on a table, it looks like an ugly mosaic finally forming a picture. Not a beautiful picture, a real one. And real pictures are what juries believe. The second suspect becomes the storm center, because the second suspect is the kind of person communities protect by instinct. The clean reputation, the civic involvement, the friendly wave, he would never. Those 4 words, he would never, are the softest armor evil can wear. Detectives know it. Prosecutors know it. And the second suspect knows it too. Their lawyer is aggressive now, not in a loud way, but in a precise way, filing motions, challenging statements, attacking credibility. They want to turn the caller into a liar, a desperate person looking for a deal, someone the jury can dismiss without looking at the evidence. They want the town to choose comfort. They want the story to become complicated enough that people sigh and say, "We'll never really know." But the town doesn't feel comfortable anymore. Not with cameras outside the station. Not with deputies parked at addresses people recognize. Not with the sight of a familiar face walking into court flanked by officers. The community splits in real time. Some people furious, some people defensive, some people suddenly silent as if silence can protect them too. Old friendships fracture. Old conversations are reinterpreted. Someone says, "Remember how he always got nervous when the victim's name came up?" Someone else says, "You're imagining things." Someone else says nothing at all, because they're remembering a moment they should have reported 20 years ago and didn't. The family is pulled into the center of all of it, and no one warns you how brutal that is. For years, their grief was private enough to be survivable. Now it's public, held up to microphones, turned into a headline, into a talking point, into strangers' comments online. People who never met the victim suddenly speak their name with confidence, as if they own a piece of this story. The family learns what it means to be stunned, not as a dramatic reaction, but as a physical state. Moving through days as if through water, hearing words without absorbing them, crying in sudden bursts in parking lots and grocery aisles because there is nowhere in town that isn't contaminated by memory. They are offered choices, whether to speak publicly, whether to attend the hearing, whether to sit behind the prosecutor and look at the accused. Choices that don't feel like choices. The first hearing arrives like a thunderclap. The courthouse is smaller than you expect, the kind of building you pass without thinking, and yet it holds the power to rewrite a town's identity. Reporters line the steps. Locals gather at the edges. The first suspect appears in cuffs, and the sight is surreal, because there's no dramatic villain costume, no obvious monster. It's a person who used to exist in the same world as everyone else. A person who had holidays, errands, neighbors. A person now facing words like charges and bond and evidence. The judge speaks in a flat tone, and the flatness is what makes it terrifying, because it reminds you that the worst things can be handled like paperwork. The family sees the first suspect and expects to feel triumph, or rage, or relief. What they feel instead is something colder and sharper. Grief. Pure grief, because no arrest brings back what was lost. No confession rewinds time. No courtroom fixes the years of birthdays missed, the years of wondering, the years of hope that turned into a kind of slow poison. The family holds each other as the hearing moves forward, each legal phrase landing like a small blow. When they leave, the cameras follow. They don't look at the cameras. They look at the ground, because the ground is the only thing that isn't asking them to perform. Then the second suspect's turn begins. Not necessarily an arrest in that exact moment, not necessarily a satisfying click of cuffs for the crowd, but the unmistakable tightening of the legal net. New warrants, new subpoenas, a search of property, the quiet seizure of devices, the interviews of people the second suspect once controlled with charm and reputation. The second suspect maintains composure in public, but detectives notice the cracks. The sudden insistence that everyone is out to get them, the anger that flashes too fast, the obsession with what the police have. They are no longer confident. They are strategic. And strategy is what people cling to when they are afraid. The caller is brought in again to clarify contradictions, because contradictions are what defense attorneys feast on. The caller doesn't sound heroic. They sound human. They sound like someone trying to climb out of a pit they helped dig. They admit where they lied before. They admit what they minimized. They sign their statement with a hand that shakes. They aren't forgiven. They aren't celebrated. They are used because the truth needs a voice, even when the voice is flawed. The case file, once a symbol of failure, becomes a monument to persistence, to the idea that time doesn't erase wrongdoing, it just changes the shape of the chase. Detectives who were rookies when the case went cold now sit with it as veterans, and the weight is visible in the lines on their faces. They talk about what still isn't known. Whether there were more people involved than the caller admits. Whether someone else helped move evidence. Whether the second suspect had more control than anyone wants to believe. The closer you get to a truth, the more you see the edges of what you still can't prove. And then, late one evening, after another day of filings and interviews, after another flood of speculation outside, the family returns home to a house that feels like it belongs to strangers. They sit in the dim kitchen light and talk about something they haven't talked about in years. What it would feel like to stop waiting. Not to stop mourning, not to stop missing, but to stop waiting for the phone to ring with news. To stop living in suspense. The word closure is spoken and then rejected, because closure sounds too clean, too final, too easy. What they want isn't closure. What they want is truth with accountability attached to it. Truth that doesn't slip back into silence the way it did before. Outside, the town is quieter than it has been in weeks. But it isn't peaceful. It's exhausted. It's bruised by its own realization. People drive past familiar houses and feel something new. Suspicion, shame, disbelief, anger at themselves for not seeing. Some people will cling to denial until the end because denial feels like safety. Others will demand punishment because punishment feels like order. But beneath those reactions, there is the same haunting recognition. The past was here the whole time. It didn't disappear. It lived among them. It attended events. It smiled. It built a life. And a family carried the cost. The cold case is cracked, yes, but cracking is not the same as finished. Cracking is the sound of something breaking open, the sound of truth forcing itself through the last layers of protection. What comes next will be hearings, motions, trials, a fight between what happened and what can be proven, a fight between reputation and evidence, a fight between a town's desire to move on and a family's right to know. And even with confessions and arrests and recovered truths, there will still be questions that linger in the corners of this story, questions that keep people awake. Why did nobody speak sooner? Who else knew? What moments could have changed everything if someone had been brave for just 5 seconds in 2001? Because the most terrifying part of a case like this isn't the night it happened. It's the years after, the years where people learned to live next to an open wound without looking at it. Now the wound is exposed again, raw, undeniable, and the community will never be the same. The family will never be the same. The truth, whatever shape it finally takes in a courtroom, will not feel like an ending. It will feel like a door opening into a room that has been locked for 20 years, letting out air that has been trapped too long, air that tastes like regret and fear and human weakness. And when that air finally fills the town, there will be no going back to the old silence, because silence was the accomplice that lasted the longest. And tonight, as the lights in the sheriff's office burn late once more, the only thing that feels certain is this: the past has stopped waiting, and it's here to collect everything it's owed.